You know, Daniel, it's what a time to be alive, right? We are living in the midst of a unique um, diplomatic feud, or the fact that the United States is being sidelined. I'll tell you how I see it, and then I'm curious for your thoughts. But from my perspective, the imminent deal between Oman and Iran, which is seemingly going to be announced by the UN and the US, according to a couple of US officials I heard on X. But the Americans being sidelined from this actual deal. So they're going to announce this deal, but it doesn't include them. So how does that work? It's such an embarrassment for Trump, I think. But what do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, so far, and primarily the Iranian side has said that this has nothing to do with the United States. It has nothing to do with the MOU. They said this is not even related to that. This is just between us and Oman, and we're going to decide how we're going to administer the Strait of Hormuz for a 60-day period. So it's the same number from the MOU, but obviously that one fell apart within days. And so they said this is not that. This is our own separate 60-day deal, and then after that time, then we're going to start charging fees again, but we'll keep it open for a while. But see, that requires the United States to agree to it, because we have to release our blockade. So right now we're back to the dueling blockades. Iran is taking anything from going out that's not according to its terms, and then we're blocking anything that's on the Iranian side. So Iran and Oman can agree to whatever they want to, but the U.S. has to agree to lift its blockade, or else it doesn't make any difference. And yeah, I mean, we're completely sidelined. And, you have so many headwinds in the United States from people like Jack Keane, who yesterday, just the latest, along with General Keith Kellogg, also retired general, all they're saying is don't trust the Iranians. You can't trust them anything. They never keep their word. So we need to go back and finish the job militarily. We need to go back in big, etc. Oblivious to the fact that we've already tried that. We've tried to go big. We've tried to go medium size. We've tried the blockade. Now we're kind of doing it again. None of it has worked. And so now you want to go back and to do it again, when all we had to do, Pyotr, all we had to do was just abide by the agreement that Trump signed on June 17th. Then the strait by now would probably have been 90% open, something close to that. Maybe it would actually have been close to the pre-war levels, as long as everybody, and I'm talking the civilian tankers primarily, the companies, had confidence that it was going to be kept and that it wasn't going to fall apart. We could be well on the way to full open. It should have been, actually would have been by this time, if everybody had abided by it. But we inserted ourselves on the 5th day, I think, after the MOU was signed, and added a second corridor, which was not authorized within the framework of the memorandum, et cetera. So now then the question is, will we abide by this one? If Iran and Oman come up with a deal, will we say, okay? Because we need to. That's what the United States, we're having as much economic difficulty, and our allies in the region are having huge financial issues. There's not much focus posted on that, because while the blockade is happening, the dual blockades, they're not getting paid. They're not getting revenue from selling oil, and they desperately need that. You're talking like 5-6 months now. So it's a big deal for them. So they desperately want this opened up. Our needs, financial needs anyway, we need it opened up. But then you've got these war hawks like the Keane, Kellogg, Mike Pompeo, a whole host of other folks that keep going on, James Carafano, et cetera, on Fox News. And listen, those guys got to be sidelined, and they got to be told to be quiet so that the president can have the space he needs diplomatically. He can make up whatever he wants and put a good spin on it, put lipstick on a pig. I don't care, as long as he says we're going to open up our blockade. They're going to open up their blockade on their terms, and that's just going to have to be good enough, because we don't have the leverage to compel them to do anything else.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's we just had Alex Craner on, and we've had some regulars on, and it's all the same thing, right? You could be an economist, a military analyst, a historian, a political scientist, and the consensus is that this is just a complete screw up for the US, and what could have been something reasonable in the MOU. Trump can somehow play it to his crowd, or what's left of it, and say, even though the deal is nowhere as good as the JCPOA was, or what was before, which was just no potential toll over the Strait of Hormuz, we're just here now. So how does Trump try to get out of this? Or there is nothing that the United States can do at this point to try to leverage. Does it have anything to leverage?
Well, other than releasing the strength, that's where you have some leverage. You have some leverage on lifting economic sanctions, on releasing frozen funds. That's leverage. That's leverage that can get Iran to say, "Hey, we'll agree to some things that you want." Because if you try to go in with just sticks and no carrots, you're going to get nothing. Because the Iranian side has been, they have been suffering for, well, most of their 47 years from economic sanctions and other attacks. But throughout this period of time here, they've been under enormous pressure and enormous pain. And they had clearly chosen a path that says, we don't care. You can do whatever you want to us. We are never giving this back up here, because we know that is the leverage that we hold over you that keeps this from going too long. And so there's no more pain you can bring on them, no more sticks. You can go back to firing. You can go back to more missiles. You can go back to other attacks. It's not going to matter. It's not going to change their calculus, because they're already locked in. This is the path they're going to go on. So if you want to have leverage, if you want them to change that course, then you've got to try the carrot part, which we don't ever want to do, because it's just hatred by many of these warlusters in the United States here to give anything ever to Iran, because Jack Keane just yesterday reiterated that same thing. You can't trust Iran. They always break their deal within days. They violated the MOU and all this kind of stuff. It's, most of it's just completely made up or out of context. But the point is that they're communicating to their side is that we can't make a deal. You can't agree to something with Iran because they're evil, they're untrustworthy, fill in the blank. So you're setting yourself up for not being able to go back and offer carrots unless President Trump privately tells them to shut up and get off the airwaves, or get in line and start telling everybody how this is a great deal, which he has the power to do. So I hope that he does that, because if he lets this current status go and lets these people keep talking the way they have, they're undermining his ability to have any leverage of negotiation with Iran.
Yeah, we had General H.R. McMaster on at the beginning of the week, and he's quite hawkish on these things. And he was making the point that essentially, we've tried diplomacy, we've tried negotiations, we've tried sanctions or economic warfare. The only way that the Iranians will respond is through hard power. But
I'm sorry. That is almost the mirror image of reality. We did not try negotiations. We did not try diplomacy because we had it. We had it in our hands with this MOU, and all we had to do was abide by it, and the strait would be open today. And then we have tried the military, and it didn't work. So it's irrational and illogical to say, now let's go back and not do what did work, and let's go back again and try what didn't work. So that's the big beef I have with that line of argument that I hear from so many people, is it's irrational and it's counterintuitive to what has actually happened. It's literally the opposite.
Yeah, but his emphasis is that we need to up the ante even more, that the Iranians, if there was a proper...
By what? How can you up the... What ante do we have? We depleted most of our key weapon systems. What does he suggest?
The ground forces element, more comprehensive approach on top of look, I'm not going to speak for the general. It's a very interesting conversation, and I agreed with some of what he has to say about China, but his hawkish approach towards the Middle East, I was saying what you're saying, which was that, but if it hasn't worked before, why is it going to work now? And also all of this stuff is, again, not something that would have ever existed if Trump hadn't just gotten impulsive, fed up with the peace talks in February, which was about the nuclear programs, and not about everything, just the peace talk about the nuclear file. Then we wouldn't be in this situation, which is why I find other people who say, well, now we've got a duty to force the Iranians to open the strait. Well, it wasn't closed beforehand, you morons. Like, why did you decide to do that? It's such a stupid, it's such a... I don't understand why. Illogical. The short-termist time horizon of these people, the memory of some people. Again, H.R. McMaster didn't say that, but what he did say was that we need a more comprehensive approach to deal with the Iranian situation. But I wonder, so taking Karg Island, that's not going to do anything. So it just seems like we're going back to where we were in June or April, right? All these.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I didn't see your interview with McMaster. I did see the comments by General Kellogg, who has been emphatic about saying, yes, let's take Kargil. And I'm like, dude, have you guys never looked at a map of Iran? Do you not realize that it would be near suicide if you put troops on Kargil? Okay, great. You can take over, at least theoretically, for some period of time, and prevent Iran from using that to send out oil or anything, and that can hold them hostage, so to speak, financially. But we're doing that now with the blockade. It doesn't matter whether they have control of Kargil, they can't get the oil out through the strait. So we've effectively already shut it off. You don't need to put one troop on the ground. But if you did, holy crap, take a look at that, how close that is to the Iranian shoreline. I mean, they could just line up artillery batteries just all up and down that for over, scores of miles and just rain fire down on it. Or they could use drones, or they could use long range, medium range, short range missiles fired from all over their country. And it's like shooting fish in a barrel. There's nothing we could do to protect them. How would we get them reinforced? How would we get them medical support, et cetera? There's nowhere to hide there. So it would be military suicide to put people there, and it still wouldn't change anything about the dynamics of getting the Strait of Hormuz open. That's what is it, hundreds of miles away from the strait. It's not even related to it. So I cannot imagine why any of these people who were general officers have I don't know where the logic is to even suggest this, something that is so clearly, evidently, militarily foolhardy.
Yeah, foolhardy indeed. So what does this do for the regional balance of power? The other thing that I wanted to get your hot take on was this new defense pact between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. That's a huge deal. I remember calling this back in April, May, that this was going to happen, that there are these two blocks emerging, and Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and by extension, sort of, I think it was Qatar, is on one side of this, and it's certainly not going the way of the Abraham Accords as Trump has been trying to do, which is sign Saudi Arabia onto the Abraham Accords and the normalization of relations with Israel. So, how do you think that plays into all of this now, or you think it's over?
Well, what does it actually mean? Now, I saw some of the language used in this thing here. An attack on one is an attack on all, almost taken straight out of Article 5 from the NATO Charter. But then you look a little deeper in, and there's no actual enforcement mechanism. And I mean, Saudi Arabia is certainly saying, I mean, the first message that I got, even besides from the language of it, is that why are they signing a military pact with these regional powers here when allegedly that's what the U.S. was supposed to do, is provide them security? Well, we've exposed we can't protect anybody. But I don't know what Saudi Arabia thinks Pakistan is going to do, or what NATO allied Turkey is going to do. Are they going to come and fight the Houthis alongside them? I mean, that's really the first test of this. Because, I mean, Saudi Arabia is worried about having to fight the PMF in Iraq, some of these militia there. They are already basically in an engagement with the Houthis again, as the Houthis are trying to force Saudi Arabia to stop its blockade on the Houthis by trying to impose one on themselves. And they say they may close the whole Bab el-Mandab. Now, what are they going to do if Saudi Arabia finds itself being attacked from Iraq rather, on one side, and the Houthis on another side? Is Pakistan going to join the fight? Is Turkey going to join the fight? I find that highly unlikely. So I don't know that this has any substance to it, but I mean, I can see Saudi Arabia wanting to have it to mean that, and they'll certainly ask them to do so. But the Houthis, by the way, I think they could care less. They're like, sure, bring it on. Whoever wants to join in, we'll just add some attacks if they get in the range here, and they have the ability to hit some things with the military, with the missiles factories that they have. So we'll see how it's going to work out.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for me, it's a case of collective deterrence, right? The Saudis, of like anyone, know that the United States has demonstrated quite clearly that it doesn't have the capacity or reliability to come through to protect them. After, for what was long believed that the US would deal with the Iranians in a decisive way, it's very much not the case, and made worse by Trump being in office and his mental whatever's going on in his head. I'm not going to say mental processes or stability, but something else. And therefore they feel that they need some kind of collective deterrence. But what I think is interesting about Turkey, I mean, yeah, they did make quite explicit remarks to Iran that, if they did strike into Turkish territory, that would be potential response. And the thing about NATO is that, Turkey can respond, but it doesn't necessarily have to activate Article 5. It doesn't have to activate Article 4. There can be consultations, but, they can still independently operate. And Turkey is a potent military force in a way that I think a lot of people don't realize. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's largely more just, as you say, symbolism than actual substance right now. But it's interesting that they've decided to build on that strategic partnership, which the Saudis and Pakistanis signed back in November. So what's to come of it? But what do you think that this means for the United States-Saudi relationship? Because the Trump administration gave them this nuclear deal a couple of weeks ago. But the petrodollar is looking very shaky right now, isn't it?
Well, I mean, we see if they actually gave them a deal or not on that nuclear stuff, because then the very next day, President Trump says, well, I mean, as long as you join the Abraham Accords, which Saudi Arabia said that was never part of our agreement. We definitely are not going to just sign this the Abraham Accords unless there's a two-state solution for the Palestinian people and some peace and freedom, et cetera. Israel is not even contemplating that. So if that's the connection, then there's not going to be one. And look, Saudi Arabia is a hot mess right now, because they also did agree with us to start attacking Iraqi PMF units here jointly with the United States. And because they're in a religious period right now, the PMF have said they will definitely respond back to Saudi Arabia after this religious period is over. I'm not sure the date on that. I think it was like 40 days total. I'm not sure when it expires, but they said they were definitely going to do something. Why do you want to stir that hornet's nest up while you're trying to face this whole issue with a renewed willingness on the Houthis to now start striking, Saudi Aramco facilities, possibly some other pipeline facilities, and now closing off the Strait of Bab el-Mandab to Saudi oil? And now then they're threatening that they may also include the Suez Canal in that from the Houthis' perspective. So why do you want to start stirring up those pots at the same time? Who does that benefit? How does that benefit Saudi Arabia to potentially get in a two-front war when they know that the United States can't protect them? And I get it that they want Pakistan and Turkey to come to their aid, but I'm telling you, it's hard for me to imagine either one of them actually deploying combat power to help Saudi Arabia in this two-front war. Any of these troops are going to die for the Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure how popular that would be at home.
No, and Pakistan's an interesting one as well, Daniel, because they've obviously been hedging. They've been trying to be seen as the mediator, but that's been heavily supported by the Chinese. But they've also hosted and taken Iranian equipment to avoid it being struck by America and Israel in the past few months. So the Pakistanis are really trying to sort of, and they've been praised by Trump as well. So is this a huge risk for Pakistan, do you think? The United States is trying to influence all these countries in that way, but they can't.
Right? I think it is. I think it's a big risk for Pakistan. I mean, they have their own issues internally. The prime minister has got his own problems, and his own legitimacy in trying to keep together a large, pretty restive pro-Iranian Shia population that he has to be navigating. So he's got to be careful there too. I mean, the last thing they want to do is stir up internal dynamics, because they're going to go and try to help somebody else against some other Shia Muslims. I don't think that's going to be very popular inside of Pakistan. And they've got a lot of economic challenges as well. I mean, they're heavily indebted, et cetera. So I think they're in a much more precarious position to project any power. I mean, they're pretty meaningful. As they showed recently with India. I mean, they can do some military damage, but I think that's more like defensive work. But projecting power, that's a different story.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, I wanted to get your take on this, on the munitions shortages. because that was quite an entertaining bit of news yesterday morning when Trump is sort of lambasting Hegseth and then lambasting the media for saying what he actually did. What is going on with the political military dynamics right now to you?
Well, President Trump posted on Truth Social that there was no truth to it at all. We got all the ammunition we want. We're totally good with all that. You had Caroline Leavitt saying, "Oh, there's definitely no truth to it. There's definitely all made up fake news, etc." And then you had President Trump yesterday afternoon in the Oval Office was asked about the request by Volodymyr Zelensky about that he is desperate for Patriot interceptor missiles, and he's basically begging Europe and the United States for them. And President Trump says, yeah, well, we're not going to give him any more missiles. We don't have them to give. We gave too many already under the Biden administration. We're trying to repair and replenish them, et cetera, kind of giving the game away. So if we have plenty here, then we could potentially give some to him. But President Trump said, yeah, we actually don't. So I think that's where the truth is. And so I think these reports are, who knows the exact number, whether we're completely right or not, but it is self-evident that obviously there is a significant percentage of all of our ammunition of these key weapon sites. And we're talking the THAAD, the PAC-3 interceptors, the ATACMS missiles, the PRSMs, the HIMARS situations, and SM-2s, SM-3s. When you look at all of those categories, offensive and defensive, that have been utilized up, because you add in the JASSMs and the Tomahawks to go along with all that, and you can see we have, in just a short period of time, just a handful of months, we have gone through huge percentages. By some reports, up to 80% of some categories have been used up in a war that should never have started, that cannot be militarily won. And so that's why it makes even more crazy these ideas of these former generals suggesting that we go back in big and escalate. We don't have it to escalate with. We've used so much of the stuff we have. You want to escalate that, and then you're going to have us in, fumes of these kinds of things. And you're talking our global requirements. What about the Indo-Pacific? What if something pops up there? Or in Russia, God forbid, if anything with Russia and NATO should spark beyond the borders, what are we going to do then? Or if we have a Pearl Harbor type of, somebody hits us unexpectedly, we get into a war we didn't choose, what are we going to have to defend ourselves or to attack that other country? I mean, it is insane that we have burned through this much of our very limited and very expensive and very difficult to replace stockpiles of the weapons that you need in a modern warfare on this war that didn't even matter. And so it should be a red alarm, which is why we should do whatever it takes to get out of this Iran war immediately. Tell the Ukraine side you're on your own, figure it out, come up with some kind of negotiated settlement, whatever you got to do, get that war over with, because we got nothing else to give to you. That basically is the case already. So Zelensky's going to be facing some pretty hard choices, I think, as we get in through the summer and into the fall already, because you've seen the images come out. None of the Russian missiles have recently been intercepted. So they almost have it free reign in the capital city. Just imagine up on the actual operational zone on the front lines, et cetera. So all of these things are starting to come apart here. It's not making us look good in any aspect you want to look at it.
Well, I mean, America doesn't have any relationship to Ukraine, though. It doesn't provide anything to Ukraine. So I'm not sure what the relationship is there.
Well, they're begging for it. You see, Zelensky is begging for more, but we don't have it to give. So there's just not much more we can. We did have an $8 billion package that was moving through Congress recently. So we're trying to give them more stuff, but we just don't have enough of it to give, and we shouldn't give what we have.
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine has its troubles, but I think given what the Russians are dealing with, the wildberry strikes, Crimea, the front lines, 30,000 North Koreans coming over, I think both sides look pretty crummy, and I don't even pay much attention to the United States input on Ukraine because it's minimal. I think the bigger concern is China. Any conflict that may potentially happen over China and Taiwan, this is where lack of stockpiles replenished is a real problem. It's because it's not only, correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, but it's not only just interceptors, it's Tomahawks. It's
right.
Patriot, it's all those sorts of stuff. So cruise missiles as well. Like, just how bad is it? Do you have any assessment, any figures of like, that could enlighten us to the true extent that it's been depleted? I read
Well,
somewhere.
the Center for Strategic and International Studies just produced a report, I think it was a week or so ago, where they did quantify their best estimate for how many of these different categories of missiles, both the offensive and the defensive, and they're all substantially weakened. I mean, they actually put some pretty specific numbers on them. And it's, it's massive percentages. It's in line with a lot of what CNN and Washington Post have been reporting, et cetera. And that's why I say the bottom line is whatever the actual number is, it is really low. And that's the reason why I was saying if we got into a contingency in either the Indo-Pacific or in Europe, we're screwed because we can't even come close to competing. I mean, especially in the Indo-Pacific, like something over Taiwan, South China Seas, something along those lines, we would get crushed because we don't have the interceptor missiles and we don't have the offensive missiles to match come even close to what China can do, and especially industrial capacity. They just blow us out of the water there. So they could sustain all kinds of stuff, and we couldn't even sustain a short period. So it is very made us vulnerable strategically across the board here because of this foolhardy decision in the Middle East.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it here. If it's the one from the 27th of July, it says renewed Iran war would test diminished interceptor infantry. So pre-war, so February 27th, there were 2,330 Patriots at the ceasefire of April 8th. After the aerial operations, it was about 1,030, so you'd used up more than half. And now it's, or back then, it was 760 to sort of 820. From THAAD, pre-war was about 452. Today, it's about 250. That is a sizable reduction, especially in the Patriots. That's an insane amount of reduction there. So what does that do from the other side? Like, what does that kind of impression does that give countries that look at it and think, wow, the United States really has nothing left, right? How bad is that to you?
Well, it just exposes the limits of our power. A lot of the impression of our power before was that we could do literally anything we wanted to, and that no one would dare face us because they knew that they would have this overwhelming strike capabilities back in our side. I mean, you have the aircraft carriers, you have all this different categories of all these fighter jets, F-22s, F-35s, F-16s, you name it. And these ground combat capabilities, the ground missile launchers, the tanks, the armor personnel carriers, et cetera. We just had this impression that we were an unstoppable force because we demonstrated it in certain respects in the past. But now then that's been exposed as more of a PR thing, because I'm telling you, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't even matter how many aircraft carriers you got, how many fighter jets you have, how many missile launchers, if you don't have the missiles to go in them. And if you had burned through those, then all the platforms are literally meaningless. And when you see your industrial capacity cannot keep track of even one of these wars, much less support the other one for Ukraine, it's not even a theoretical possibility now. It exposes to all these other great powers, whether you're talking China, Russia, even North Korea for that matter, they have changed their calculations. Now, that's not to say that they're all going to say, oh, they're weak, let's go to war, because they'll go into war is a matter of their national interest and their cost calculation. Is that the necessary to get their objective? They're not like us. We just use war as the first policy option tool anymore. It's not a last resort. For most other countries, it's still a last resort. But that may make them be a lot more willing to take risk against us, maybe take other actions that are economically, for example, potentially, or relationships that they might not have taken before because they were concerned. Now they're going to be less concerned. And it's just evident that we are not this unstoppable military power. Now we have plenty of power. We can still recover from this, and we can project power like really nobody else. But there are limits to it. And now then people are starting to realize what those limits are.
Yeah, and I guess when it comes to the infighting between Hegseth and Trump, Rubio's been back and forth as well on his positions. How does the political side to this look to you? They can't get a hold of it before the midterms. It's just
well, I mean, they're not going to get hold of anything. I mean, the die is cast.
They're not going to get a hold of more munition stockpiles, are they?
Exactly. I mean, the die is cast. You can't undo the damage that's already been done. All you can do is stop digging deeper the hole that we've made ourselves for. And so politically, all we're going to be doing is just trying to paper over things or pretend otherwise things aren't the way they are. Pretend we have capabilities we don't, put lipstick on a pig, all that kind of stuff. That's the best you can do, because you're not going to be able to compel your adversary to do what we want. So you're just going to have to paper it over politically.
So I guess, like, how much time do we have with you then? Another 5-10 minutes, I think.
Yes, we do. Yeah, I can go in at least another 5.
Great. So yeah, I mean, look, from my perspective, what's also interested is the Bab el-Mandeb theatre to this. This is something that I've been speaking to quite a few people about, because when it was first becoming apparent that this was going to become another flashpoint, it doesn't seem to have become as flashy as I was expecting. The Houthis have made certain strikes towards the Saudis, but it's been relatively restrained. Do you think that's deliberate, or the Iranians haven't activated them, or the Houthis just don't want to do anything?
Apparently, it has been apparently it's been deliberate, because one of their spokesmen in an ex post this morning said that if things continue to escalate, they said they could completely shut down the Bab el-Mandeb, not just to Saudi oil, but they could shut it down from everything. They could also bring into play the Suez Canal in the north side of the Red Sea, etc. So implying, that's what they're saying anyway, whether they can actually bring it to bear is another question. But because there has been some Saudi oil getting out, it's just been significantly constrained from what it was prior to the Houthis making this sound here, these threats. But it's not anything that I would put to the test. I would not want to find out, can they do it or can they not? Because they've shown with some of their missile strikes hitting Saudi Aramco facilities, et cetera. They fired in a number of places. I think there was some more even last night that they set ablaze in some Saudi Arabia. They hit some targets that the Saudi forces have inside of Yemen, et cetera. So they definitely have some capabilities. It just remains to be seen how far it can go.
Yeah, from my understanding, the Houthis are quite conservative. They have stockpiles, but they don't want to overly utilize them. I think in the whole war since February 28th, they've only really fired 2 projectiles. Or no, prior to the sort of them getting more involved 2 weeks ago. But before that, I think it was only in April, end of March, beginning of April, that they fired literally 1 projectile towards Israel, and that was largely it. But speaking of Israel, we've obviously got this upcoming election. The centrist candidate, I forget his name, former chief of staff for the IDF, if I remember, is winning in the polls, only by 1 point, but he is leading in the polls. So do we think anything could happen with the Israeli front, for specifically Lebanon? I'll put to you my fear here, Daniel, which is, so I keep wanting to say your surname for some reason, which is the Lebanese front file is the sticking point for the Iranians over the American-Iranian MOU. If the Israelis go back to trying to strike there significantly, then we're just going to see a heightened. They're just going to strike Jordan again. They're going to strike Egypt as they did for the first time last week. Like, how can Israel be restrained? How can Netanyahu be stopped? The guys are off his face, with war.
The only way that they can be restrained and stopped is if President Trump makes a concerted decision to do so. He can completely bring the Israeli operations to a grinding halt by saying, that's it. We're cutting off all of our supplies to you. You're not going to get anything else because you're taking actions that's antithetical to American interests. Not only it's not in American interest, it's harmful to our interests. So he could do that. That power resides there in his hand, and he could do it at any time. He's chosen not to do so far. And Israel clearly doesn't think he ever will. So they continue to take these actions that are antithetical to our interests. And whether this new, if Netanyahu his party doesn't win and he's not the prime minister, I don't see a whole lot of difference in there from some of the Israeli experts I've talked to with the potential new prime minister should they win the elections, as you mentioned there. There would be some nuanced differences. He's a little bit more risk averse. He's a little bit more practical minded, but he's still on the right of the Israeli politics, I'm told. So we should not expect any meaningful change in there. The only thing that's going to happen is if the United States decides to put some constraints on things, which of course would come up with enormous headwinds in the United States because there are so many powerful pro-Israeli forces, both inside the government and outside it, that have influence on the White House. So President Trump would have to develop a backbone that he has so far not shown evidence of having.
What a sort of a backbone that he has not had. Yes, very much definitive there, Daniel. But I guess sort of my last question really is, looking ahead, I'll put this in two different ways. What do you think is most likely to happen in the next period of time? We get this deal announced between Oman and Iran, and the United States effectively is just sidelined and it has to move forward with that. But versus what would you prefer to happen if you could be advising the Trump administration? What would you be saying? But what do you also think is more likely to happen? And
I'll tell you the second one first, because I've been emphatic about saying this forever. We need to do the walk away plan. He needs to just say, you know what, make up a story. We hit them so hard it's going to take them 2 decades to recover. And if they ever go back to those nuclear sites, we've got them under satellite and we'll go back and hit them again or whatever. But we can safely walk away because, we have set their nuclear program back. We've destroyed their Navy, all this stuff that he says. And so we're just going to take our choice and we're going to go home and we'll come back if we need to. But the damage is done. We're now safe, blah, blah, blah. That's what we should do because that's what's in our power to do. You don't have to worry about an MOU. You don't have to worry about who is abiding by this or not. Will the Iranians do this? Do I have to give away the frozen funds? You don't have to address any of those issues. You just leave. And so the Iranian side then has every incentive to open the Strait of Hormuz because they need the revenue. So they will open it up. And then they have incentive even for all the GCC countries to send their oil through because they're going to be charging a fee on that. So they're going to get revenue from that too. So all of that works in our favor because their own motivation will open the strait up and get the flow going back. Is just what the whole global community needs. Our GCC allies get victory because the war comes to an end. Their revenue starts to come back up again and they can start to recover, etc. That is the most operationally effective thing to do. It does come with some big headwinds because we'll have to face, heat in Israel because they're not going to want us to do that. A deal is the last thing they want, or us to leave is the last thing they want. But he'll just have to deal with that. And he's got the headwinds at home. But those are all political things. What he has going favor from him from this deal is that genuine polling here in the U.S. shows overwhelmingly that President Trump's primary supporters would love that deal. They could care less about any kind of a deal with the Strait of Hormuz or whatever, as long as the oil is back open again. As long as their price of gasoline comes down, they could care less about the Middle East. They want our forces to leave. So all that would play into President Trump's hands, and that is by far his best course of action because he can just do it all unilaterally and just tell everybody else they can, pound sand if they don't like it. But I again, like a comment I just made there, he hasn't had a strong enough backbone to stand up to all those people who would be yelling. And I fear that he's going to try and find a middle way, which is to not walk away, but also not to try to go back into full-on combat power that I think is now clearly observed that we don't have the capacity to do. And even if we utilized it and did that big World War II style strike that he allegedly was going to do last weekend, he realizes that it wouldn't make any difference. We have a lot of ammunition. We do have all of our stockpiles restocked back up to what they were before. But the overall stockpiles, you had to drain so many others to get the magazine depth up, as it's called. You could launch all that stuff and you could have a huge strike and blow up all kinds of stuff on the surface of Iran, but it's not going to take away their ability to control the strait. So at the end of the day, they still would have control of the strait. It would still be closed, and you would have now a lot less ammunition. So I think President Trump realizes that that's a dead end, that then he doesn't even have any more flexibility. But I don't think that he's just going to walk away. So he's going to try to be half pregnant, so to speak. And he's going to maybe try something smaller or just keep talking tough. But the problem is there's a clock on that one too, because every day those dueling blockades stay in place, it's going to put more and more upward pressure on the potential for an economic recession. And it's going to keep the price of gasoline going up. And, now that the midterms are close now, it's like less than 90 days, I think. So now everything matters for that, and that is going to be putting additional pressure on him. I can't hardly predict how he's going to operate because there's so many different ways it could go.
Yeah, but what happens to the economy? What do you think? Are we going to see a recession? Larry Johnson thinks so. I'm worried about it. Oil prices, the markets seem incredibly detached and disillusioned about the war. Oil prices seem to go down when, or is it just Trump playing the markets? But the whole thing seems crazy like that.
Yeah, he has been remarkably successful at manipulating the paper price of oil and making the prices low, where the fundamentals certainly don't support that. But you're losing the ability to do that, because when there is physically not enough jet fuel coming out, it doesn't matter what you want to do with the paper. It matters how much fuel is there to go in a plane. And if you don't have it, then you're going to have to either raise the prices or cut support or cut flights, et cetera. And then, of course, the same with diesel. Because there's just not enough of that being produced because of these blockades, and that's going to affect your price. If there's not diesel, then you can go to the pump and it's either not going to be there, or it's going to be at an elevated price as they spread it around, et cetera. And then you have the same issues with fertilizers, with helium, with aluminum, sulfuric acid, all kinds of other things. It's physically not coming out. So you can't keep that paper over too much longer. And a lot of this is because China, ironically, has been helping out by reducing by 4 million barrels a day their consumption, or their purchases rather, by using their own internal strategic petroleum reserve. We've been doing the same thing. We've been getting a lot of diesel and jet fuel on the market. At the same time, our inventories of that are running low as well. So you've got a limited flexibility there, and pretty soon you're going to be up against metal on metal, and you're not going to be able to facilitate these anymore. And that's when the price, that's when the economic pain, because you have to have all those things I just mentioned to produce economic activity. So it's not just the price of a barrel of oil, it's the physical capabilities of having these inputs to be able to do economic activity. And we've been able to massage that up until now, but you get toward the end of the summer here, which is not much longer, and you may run out of that flexibility. And that is where we're going to have a problem if we don't have the strait back open.
No, but yeah, one wonders, hopefully, if this deal comes through, but what it always means again for Trump's reaction and whether or not we go off the end. But Daniel, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, everyone, for watching. Of course, check out Daniel's channel if you haven't already. Subscribe to mine if you haven't already. And, well, like the video. It's free. It helps. But we'll see you all very soon, Daniel. Look forward to having you back on. And hopefully there's some more positive news on the horizon.
Would love to see some.